welcome back to the Growing Revolution Smart Potcast. I'm Eric Olson with Smart Pot Fabric Planners, and this week our guest is Kris Whitten, who many people in the industry know as Horti Kris from his time on the Heavy Tea Grow Show. And we wanted to get him on the podcast because he's got a long history in the hydro industry and a lot of great stories. So, Kris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. How are you guys doing?
Man, so good to see you always. So just getting right into it, you grew up in Michigan and then moved to Virginia and eventually to SoCal. Can you explain what brought that about and then your, I guess, beginnings in hydro?
Yeah, when I was a small child, like 7 years old, my father transferred from Michigan to Virginia with the company he worked for. And I went from, Michigan to Virginia, which was a complete different change of scenery, even just like the different ethnicities and everything. It was a whole melting pot of people. And I grew up there and graduated high school there. And I was always fond of cannabis. I started smoking cannabis as a teenager, basically. And we try to grow seeds in the woods, and whatnot. And you know how that goes. But getting caught with cannabis in a place like Virginia back in the early 90s was horrible. I mean, even if you had a single seed in your car, you'd get like 6 months in jail. It was just brutal. And a friend of mine was graduating from college up at Radford University. And he was like, hey, man, I don't want to go back to Williamsburg where we grew up. He wanted to move to somewhere warm. And I was like, well, I've been to California, Huntington Beach, back when I was 14. To visit a family friend, and he's like, well, either there or Florida. I was like, I'd go to California, but I wouldn't go to Florida. And he was like, okay. So we had a mutual friend who lived in California. He flew out to meet her, met her on spring break, met her husband, who was a Enterprise rental car manager, and he got into Enterprise making decent money right out of college with a degree. So he said, hey, I'm moving. And I was like, all right, well, I'll be out there in a few months. I need to save up a little bit more money. And then I was in a situation and all of a sudden there was this huge bust of all these people. And I realized that if I didn't get out of town, I was probably going to be next. So packed my car, drove to Radford, drove to California with a 1986 VW GTI with 200,000 miles on it and $3,000 in my pocket. And it ended up working out. And we were there about a year, and we got out of our apartment and we rented a house, and we went to Newport Beach to a store called AAA Hydroponics that was owned by Kurt Osherman, who was from Sentinel Controllers and Sentinel CO2 stuff. And we bought a light and some GH 3-part and went back to our new house and started growing, and the rest is history, I guess. From that point on, I eventually would go to the grow store and I asked, like, hey, do you have something that I can like use the dryer plug and run more than 4 lights? Because I have 2 rooms. And we had thought about if you could flip the lights every 12 hours off the same ballast, you wouldn't have to upgrade the electricity in a rental house. And they didn't have anything like that. So I started researching it and ended up making the first FlipBoxes that were sold in the industry. And that allowed you to run your ballast to the unit, and then the unit had a timer, and it would flip.
You invented the FlipBox?
Yeah, I was the first FlipBox on the market. I was knocked off by PowerBox and others. But Horti Control was the original FlipBoxes on the market. And I brought those out in like 2006 or 2007. And then at the time, we used air-cooled reflectors. And, you're sucking, because it's Southern California. Eric Bixa had written an article about making a sealed room with like a lung that would allow you to have CO2 and air conditioning and not have to blow air out. So I just stuck a window AC in the room and ran my air-cooled hoods from the attic through the room and back into the attic. And I had a greenhouse controller that was made by Cat that I had purchased from AAA. And it had a CO2 sniffer and CO2 tank hooked up. So I got a CO2 tank and hooked it up, and my friends were like, that's not going to work. You need fresh air. And I'm like, fresh air is CO2 to a plant. And this was like probably 1999 or so. And a couple of weeks later, they came over to visit, and everybody sealed their room up. I mean, the plants looked phenomenal. It was like controlled environment agriculture, the beginning of that in our industry. And
Yeah.
it worked out great. So the FlipBox idea was going on, and the air cooled hoods would get so dirty. And in the beginning time, you'd have to aluminum tape all the seams on them because they didn't have those nice rubber gaskets and the quick release clamps, right? So
Yep.
I would seal these things all up, and by the time I harvested, you couldn't even see the bulb barely from all the dust.
Yeah.
So I went and bought one of those HEPA filters that looks like a car air intake filter, the Du Passe or Active Air, whatever they were called at the time. And I put it on my fan, and the fan burned out because it overheated because of the airflow loss. So at the time, I'm big into German cars and race cars, and Porsche, Audi, all that stuff. So I knew that race cars used reticulated foam as an air filter. And being in Southern California, I also realized that Baja off-road race trucks don't use a K&N air filter. They all use reticulated foam that's coated in oil, like you'd have on a dirt bike or whatever.
Okay.
And so I called a foam company and asked if they could send me samples. And the president of the company said, "Why don't you just go to Unifilter over in Fullerton, California?" And I was like, "Well, Unifilter's been around since the 70s. Every motocross champion in the world since the 1970s is sponsored by Unifilter. They're all over the world. Like, they aren't going to want to make something for people who grow weed." And he was like, "Well, have you ever met the president of Unifilter?" And I'm like, "No." He's like, let me set you up with an interview." So I go to their headquarters with some Max Shield magazines to show them pictures of air cooled hoods and whatnot. And the guy greets me at the door with like a mullet, a metal militia T-shirt, and some checkerboarded Vans on. And we go in the meeting room, and I start showing him this book, and he's like, "Is this for growing weed?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Bitchin'." So I knew right then I was totally in. So contacted Dennis from CanFan, and he sent me one of every size 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 of their high output fans. And we bolted them to a device called a flow bench that's used to measure airflow when it's being filtered, or like if you're like making cylinder heads to flow better for racing. And they were able to engineer a filter for me shaped like a mushroom cap that was made out of reticulated foam that would exceed the speed rating of all the fans, the CFM of all the fans. They're all rated with 4 feet of tubing on each side, but the actual fan without any ducting on it flows a little bit higher. So they were able to meet the rating on the box. And we knew that they use petroleum-based oil to keep the filter sticky. And I had them develop a castor oil-based alternative for our industry. And we released the DustShroom, and it quickly became the number one selling HEPA filter in the industry, and still is. And it literally kept my air-cooled hoods, my ducting, the fans completely clean. Like, it looked like you never even turned them on. And it was a game changer at the time. And I filed a patent for that because by that time people were knocking off my flip boxes because it wasn't patented. And I received a patent for the use of reticulated foam as a filtration device for horticultural applications. And so we now are evolving with all of that. But yeah, that was 13 years ago.
Oh, okay. So a patent lasts for what, 20 years? So you still
20,
got
20 years. Yeah, I've still
got 7 years on that.
7 to go. And the way the patent was written, it was extremely vague. My patent attorney happened to be fresh out of college at the time. Now he's one of the top 50 patent attorneys in the country. And
Nice.
he knows ways to kind of, maybe we're working on it right now to see if there's a way we can change some things in it and try to get it extended by like branching another patent off of that original idea. It's really hard to do, but he thinks he can pull it off. So, but for right now, I've got 7 years left. And as the industry has moved away from air-cooled hoods and things of that nature, we have a lot of vertical airflow gardens. People running the PIP systems, the air glides, the IEG or IGE stuff, all that, and they just have fans on the end just blowing contaminants all down the racks on the plants. So we've made a lot of headway into that industry, keeping all of that airflow clean. And we've been working with some greenhouses as well. There's a greenhouse here in Marshall, Michigan, where I'm at, that I outfitted with filtration on their guillotine wall that covers the wet wall. We took out the panels and just put foam up, and they passed all their testing for the first time in their history there. And that's led me to also, you probably remember Kris from Mills Nutrients. He has the proving grounds, the big greenhouses out in Southern California, down in San Diego, that he does with DNA genetics or whatever. And I went out there just a few months ago and measured it up, and we're converting that whole place to also being filtered as well. So
Nice.
it's working out.
Nice. And does that is that like going to be a retail product with like a a branding to it, or is that just a strictly commercial product then?
Well, we're Horti Control and DustShroom has kind of it's overstayed its welcome, I guess I'd say. So I've started a new company. It's called Horti Filter, which makes a little bit more sense. Everybody thinks these things are for growing mushrooms, which we're also making patches for mushroom kits because it'll keep contaminants out. But
Nice.
we're changing it up to Horti Filter, and we'll have a commercial ag side because I believe the industry is going to full commercial ag with all the distributors falling apart and kicking all the products out of them and whatnot. And we'll still manufacture the DustShroom, but it'll be called the Dust Dome. And so that part will be for your vertical indoor commercial and for retail. It'll still be available because a lot of people use them on tents, right? And then we'll have the greenhouse division will kind of be separate because that's more of a commercial ag, big ag type situation. I don't see having 4 foot wide by 4 foot high big foam panels in your local grow store being something that a lot of people would be buying. So it'll be more of a commercial division. And then we have another product we're bringing out called the Humid X, HUMID-X. And it's a reticulated foam filter for all Queston and dehumidifiers because they currently use just a pleated paper filter, which is way restrictive as it gets dirty and doesn't keep the contaminants trapped because they push through the thin fabric or the paper. And also they're prone to humidity issues because there's a lot of humidity coming through that machine and you get mold and things growing in them. So we're coming out with a less restrictive, better filter to put into all those commercial units so that people don't have to take them off the ceiling of their warehouse and take them outside and power wash them out every couple months. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
Nice. Yeah, and those filters are going to be reusable?
Yeah, the filters are reusable. They're reticulated foam, and you can take it out every couple of months and wash it out and re-oil it, and it's good as new. And typically the foam has about a 5 to 7 year life, depending on UV exposure. So that's why we've always been able to offer a 5-year warranty on the filter itself because the material is much more durable than paper or any other form of standard filtration.
Yeah, I mean, paper filters, you're supposed to exchange those like what, monthly or, every other month at the latest.
Every couple of months at the latest. And when you pull them out, they're full of dirt. But if you notice, there's duct cleaning services for your home, right? That'll come out and clean out all your ductwork because the dust gets by the filter. So it gets into your plumbing. I can take a brand new can fan, put a filter on it and hang it up outside and let it run for a year. And you bring it inside and take the filter off, and there's not even dust on the blades. It's completely clean, like the day you bought it. It filters so effectively. It filters below the level of contamination that the human eye can see, down to about 1 micron at over 90% efficiency.
That's amazing. It just goes to show you spend a little bit more on a quality product, and it might be a little bit more expensive up front, but it's going to save you time on the back end. It's going to save you, I guess, it's going to give you better performance. And that's what we're all about here too, with Smart Pots.
Absolutely. And the thing is also with the other HEPA filter on the market, the Active Air one that's sold through Hydrofarm, it brand new out of the box, it cuts your airflow by 75%. I've tested it on that flow bench machine. For example, the 6-inch can high output fan back in the day was rated at 447 CFM, and it pushes 604 CFM with no ducting on it without any static pressure loss. Our filter will do 604 CFM on that same fan. The 8-inch was at 827 and we got 807, but it's rated at 747, so I'm still above that threshold, right? That HEPA filter, the active air one, when we put it on the 6-inch filter, the CFM dropped to 150 right out of the box,
Wow.
brand new. And it's also washable and reusable. But when you wash it, the fibers, the filaments that make up the filter, they swell like when you cook spaghetti. And then once it dries out, they shrink back down and it creates bigger holes in the thing. So it flows a little bit better air, but it lets more contaminants through. So it was a
Right.
double-edged sword. People used to buy them, soak them in water, let them dry out, and then install them so they could get better airflow, but it's at the detriment to filtration.
Yeah, kind of defeating the main purpose.
Correct.
Wow. Well, that's cool. It sounds like you got a lot on your plate these days and then going forward. So I wanted to kind of go back in time. You were, I mean, besides Heavy Tea, like a mainstay on the Heavy Tea Grow Show. How did that show all come about? And then, talk about like your role on that program then.
Yeah, that was a blast from the past right there. I knew Tyler, Heavy Tea. He owned Long Beach and Cerritos Hydroponics. I didn't really shop there at the time. I shopped at Orange County Hydroponics with Mark from Mad Farmer, but he had helped Tyler set up Long Beach. So I knew of Tyler. And then when I started selling FlipBoxes, I started just going to local stores, offering them up. And then, hey, I got a customer who wants one. Hey, I know someone else who, oh, that guy's buddy wants. So it started to snowball. So I made a trip to all the stores and I went and officially met Tyler. As time went on, we would trade genetics and stuff and smoke out or have a tall can at his office or whatever, And then as time went on, I started doing trade shows. And then he wanted to bring in, so they brought in global greenhouse ballasts, I believe it was, is what they were calling them. We brought in the rock nutrients and the hydro halos, and they made some glasses called Grogles, which were the before Method 7s that would shift the spectrum of your HPS light back to a more blue so that things looked better. So I started getting trade show booths at Max Shield, and I was spending $2,000 a month, I think, at the time, advertising 2 half-page ads for both products in Max Shield. But because I was sold through distribution, I couldn't really tell if it worked, right? I didn't know if
Right.
those ads were getting me any business. The sales would pick up through the distributors, but stores weren't calling me like direct, which at the time was probably more just the model of the business. You'd see it in Max Shield, you'd get it from the distributor, right?
Right.
So after a couple trade shows, I was especially San Francisco, where all the nutrient companies, even Smart Pots, would be handing out free samples to everybody. And people are pushing baby strollers through there with hundreds of dollars of nutrients and additives, putting it in their car, coming back, getting a second helping. And then what that would do is, after that San Francisco show, all the stores wouldn't have any business for 3 months because everybody's selling all their samples on Craigslist, right?
Yep.
So I was like, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way to directly market to the end users without having to give away a bunch of shit and spend tens of thousands of dollars on a weekend in San Fran with an expensive booth and hotel rooms and dinners and, whatnot. So Tyler said to me that he was thinking about doing an online radio show. And there was a gentleman who used to work on a syndicated talk show called the Tom Likas Show, which was huge in LA. And the producer of the Tom Likas Show, they did it on CBS Radio, Vinny Stone. He knew how to set up the studio and the talk, all the microphones and the telephone system with all the lines. So we decided to do the Heavy Tea Grow Show. And it was going to be, the philosophy was Heavy Tea, the king of the castle, right? And Horti Kris, his co-host, who was knowledgeable because I'd been growing for, 15, 20 years by that point anyways. And Dr. Duff, which was Tyler's best friend, who has a lazy eye and he's a little bit slow, but he's pretty funny. So he was like the resident idiot, and we just came up with like a little comedy scene to answer questions. And when someone would call, we'd ask them where they shop. They'd tell us the store name, and we'd mail their prize and samples from our distributors to that store for them to go pick up to try to drive business into the stores. And as soon as we proposed that at the next trade show, I spoke with GH and Botanicare and Smart Pots and Blue Lab Meters and all these companies, and they all were on board. And overnight, that thing took off, and we got, I think within the first couple of months, we had over 80,000 listeners immediately on a live podcast that was interactive with the actual audience. And I mean, at 6 o'clock, they'd open up those phone lines, and that phone would ring, and for about 10 minutes, and then all the lines would be full, and people would try to call for 3 or 4 hours and couldn't get through. It was pretty amazing time, and it gave us a lot of clout.
Yeah, I mean, the Heavy Tea Grow Show really was, one of the first podcasts in general, and it had to be the first cannabis podcast. And actually, I mean, you guys couldn't even talk about cannabis for a while on the show. It was tomatoes.
Yeah, we would call it purple tomatoes, pine cones, whatever kind of, words we could come up with. We would screen the callers. We'd tell them, hey, look, if you mention cannabis, weed, I don't care if you're in a wheelchair and it's medical and you're legal, you can't talk about it. Because at that time, we were still all afraid of the RICO laws, Mention that I'm making a product that can be used to grow illegal drugs, and now I'm a continuing criminal enterprise and I can get 20 to life, right? So even at trade shows, the elephant in the room was cannabis, but there was no talking about cannabis. And as the show went on, industry people started advertising in High Times and other pro cannabis things. And so we just one day we were like, fuck it. And we just started talking about weed, and it got even bigger. And we didn't go to prison. So I guess our timing was spot on at that point.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I was on that show a few times, and very knowledge based, but done in a fun, comical way that, talking about plants is very repetitive. The growth cycle, it's not like it changes, drastically.
Right.
So you guys really found a good way to make it fun and entertaining. And I'm sure a lot of people are missing the show because I know it was a popular one.
Yeah, I mean, even my I have an aunt and uncle that are pretty anti all of this stuff, and they call me just a loser stoner and all these, like, oh, he's just a druggie. But they listened to the show one time. My uncle came to me because he grows a lot of tomatoes and stuff in the summer and sets up a little veggie stand or whatever. And I've given him some newts back in the day, like, here, sprinkle some of this on your plants. Oh, my tomatoes are the size of grapefruit. It's like, yeah, damn right they are, right? So he got into it. He told me that the first couple times they listened to the show, they listened the whole time because they were laughing. So even though it was stuff they didn't know what we were talking about, calyxes, THC levels, bricks, whatever it is, cycles, pruning, they had no idea what we were talking about, but just the fact that it was all said in a comedic trio and interacting with the caller, it was, I mean, that 3 to 4 hours that we do that show every Wednesday night, it would fly by. It wasn't like I was like looking at the clock. It was like, wow, we're almost halfway through the show, and we decimated a lot of good info. And to this day, there's people who hit me up on social media like, man, Horti, you changed my life. I was growing the swag, and we just listened to what you guys said to do, and it worked. And now I have, my own facility, and I'm licensed. And so it was good because back then people didn't share info. It was so competitive. No. You didn't let anybody know what nutrients do you use? What ones do you use? Oh, I use this. Oh, yeah, I use that too. If they didn't, they would just, no one would share the info. And I figured the only way we're going to overgrow the government is if we teach anybody who can get on a computer and log onto this website how to do it. Then everyone will know how to do it. The cat's out of the bag. The secret sauce is lost, but at least it's too many. There's too many people out there who now have that knowledge and can go to Home Depot if they have to and start tomorrow and grow better weed than anybody did up until the 2000s. So it was a pretty powerful movement. And I think they still do the show on Wednesdays, but it's a lot smaller of a show. And I I bowed out of it about 5 or 6 years ago. It had kind of run its course for me, and I stepped away. And I'm not gonna take credit for anything, but a lot of people told me that once that three-person dynamic was no longer there, like when Dr. Duff left the show, it was just me and Tyler, and we'd have a guest host every week. And I think I saw that the magic was kind of gone, and it just wasn't the same. So I stepped away from it. But yeah, it's one of those things that I'll never forget, and it secured our legacy in the industry and brought us a lot of business. So I'm pretty happy for that.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of going off what you said, like once you teach enough people to grow cannabis, it's like, well, the government isn't going to arrest, 100,000 people, and well, or maybe they will, but
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for another show. We can talk about what the government's probably going to do to us next. But yeah, you're right. Once it's common knowledge and everybody knows, and nowadays, I mean, things back in the day, they didn't have feeding charts. There weren't additives. I mean, when I started, there weren't even charcoal filters. In Huntington Beach, we'd set up in the garage or whatever. By the time we were 4 weeks into bloom, the neighbors would be looking at us walking down the street with their dogs, and we'd start looking for a new place to move, and we'd just move every harvest because you'd stink the whole neighborhood up, and there was nothing you could do about it, and it wasn't legal. You know what I mean? So it was different times, and nowadays, I mean, I visit some facilities, and they're the size of Walmarts, and they employ hundreds of people, and it all looks good. I mean, it's pretty hard not to grow good weed now when it used to be the other way around. It was hard to find well-grown cannabis, and now it's available everywhere so cheap that it destroyed the whole industry, basically. Right?
Now it's kind of a commodity. It's
right.
Cannabis has gone back to tomatoes.
It's gone back to pre-COVID toilet paper prices.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of speaking of smart pots, when were you first introduced to smart pot containers, and what was your experience with them? I'm assuming that you've used them over the years.
Oh, I have a bunch in my garage that I got to throw away now that summertime, or dump out now that summertime's here, and I can actually get to the dump spot right in the woods where we dump all of our old media. But yeah, I still use them to this day. I give them to relative. I mean, obviously they used to give me ones that said Horti Control on them. They were custom embroidered heavy tea grow show. I have so many smart pots here that I just had laying around that I take, my aunt a rose bush and it's in a smart pot. And I'm like, here's a rose bush. Nice. You can move it around the yard if you on the porch or patio or whatever. The first time I was exposed to them was at a trade show. I met because back in the day, the trade shows were small, I remember my first trade show, there was maybe 20 exhibitors. And then, even when smart pots first came on the scene, I met Charles, and we all were out at dinner somewhere in San Francisco or somewhere, and we were all just getting along. Everybody had like the common goal, not like even if you listen to different music, you found commonality in something that you enjoyed, even if it wasn't gardening, because a lot of people in this industry weren't gardeners. Like when we first started the show, people were like, man, dude, how do you know so much about growing? And I'm like, because I'm a fucking grower. Like, I didn't go to college and get a job as a sales rep in this cannabis industry. Like I started out committing felonies, so that's how I got to where I'm at. And I first met Charles at a trade show, and then we went to everybody, hey, with this heavy tea grow show idea. And, they were on board, and they were one of the first people to come on board. And then I met Dustin and Tim and yourself and everybody in the group, and they were on the show all the time. Smart Pots was on the show all the time. We'd have them on probably at least once a month, and even if they weren't the scheduled guest, they'd show up to the green room anyways in the back. It'd be a party there for industry reps that were in Southern California doing visits and whatnot. And over time, I came to the point where, I still wake up on Christmas morning and I have a text from Charles Jackson, "Merry Christmas, buddy." It's just those bonds that we grew a long time ago have remained true because we were all true people. And from plastic pot to a fabric pot, it just makes so much sense. And the technology behind it, it's like, why would you not use a fabric pot? You don't get the root circling and the heating of the root zone and all of these things that are detrimental. You don't get the even drying back and everything. Like, they just make sense. So it's one of those products that was, I mean, you can tell how good a product is by how many knockoffs there are. And
Very true.
you know, there's more fabric pots on the market than there are nutrient lines. So that tells you a
That's
lot.
true. That's true. Yeah, and kind of getting to what you were saying about, our industry, especially 10 years ago, was much more tight knit, and we just kind of became fans of each other and each other's products, and it was kind of like I almost equated it to like a traveling circus. You kind of see the same people at the
With a
same,
bunch of carnies.
same. Yeah, it's like a rock tour. You're just seeing the same people in different cities, and it's like a family.
I mean,
In a sense.
it was. You almost can't even talk about it. It's like Fight Club. You know what I mean? Like just people picking you up in private jets and flying you to wherever the hell because they're on their way there, and you said you would go, but you couldn't get a plane ticket. And somebody comes through on a private jet and picks you up, and you're disco dusting your way all the way over to wherever the hell, and dinners that are five figures. Like somebody picks up the tab on a. I mean, I've paid for $12,000 meals for a group of people at some high end restaurant that you had to have reservations to get in, but so and so knows somebody who knows somebody, and then 420 in Denver. My birthday is April 19th, and I remember I got a call 3 days before the 420 Denver festival, and these people were like, Ryan from Extreme Gardening and a couple other people were like, "Yo, Horti, you coming to 420 in Denver?" I was like, "Nah, my birthday's the day before. I wasn't really planning on it." They're like, "Fuck that, dude! You got to come to Denver, bro. I'm like, we're gonna have a huge party for you. The Horti apocalypse is gonna start." So then all of a sudden on the Facebook, other people from all over the country go, "If Horty shows up, I'll be there." And it was like 10 or 15 people who were like, "If you go, I'll get a plane ticket tonight." And I was like, "All right, you fuckers." So I booked the room, I booked the hotel or the flights for me and my fiance at the time, and end up at the Ritz Carlton in the presidential suite for the whole fucking weekend. People, the door was we just left it propped open. I mean, there was no less than 50 people in there 24/7 for 3 days. I don't even think I took the sheets down on the bed. We were all just awake and going to this event and that event, and just so many stories from that industry in that time, and to watch so many people literally go from like growing weed in Humboldt County on their second felony to selling their company for $50 million. And you watch this happen to people. I mean, even myself, I haven't sold my company, and I definitely won't get 50 million bucks for it right now. Maybe in the future, but just the success, not just from the money standpoint, but we built this industry in a time when it was very risky for what we were doing. There were definitely eyes on this industry and those trade shows and these products and those stores that were selling all of this stuff because everybody knew what it was for. And to see people that I came up with, I mean, I shared a booth. The first time I was in a booth was with Sheldon Auberman and Sean Brissett when they had Quantum Ballast, the orange ballast, and they had a big 20 by 20 or whatever for all their shit. And on the front corner, they put me there with my flip boxes on a little display that flipped like light bulbs just to kind of show how it worked. And on the corner next to me was Ross Haley with Vermicrop. We both had a little table right at the front corner on either corner of the booth. And I mean, look at he's successfully cashed out of 6 or 7 cannabis businesses now. And like, I remember when he just had Sheldon let him set up a little Vermicrop display on the corner of his booth. And, you see the success stories and all that through that. I think one day they'll have to make a movie about that era. It was legendary.
I honestly, that's kind of what I was hoping to do with this podcast, was to at least kind of chronicle some of those stories that, if we don't get it down, digitally, they'll be lost and forgotten forever. So yeah, that's kind of the goal of this, was to make sure that those founding members weren't forgotten,
Right.
about, and you're a big part of that too. So,
Well, thank you.
Yeah, of course. So what's the cannabis scene like in Michigan, I guess, compared to California, what you were used to? Especially like today. How would you rate the cannabis scene there?
I would say it's probably about the same all over the country. You still have your black market, but your commercial has gotten so huge and it's so competitive. It's just like the hydro industry, like I always used to tell people, if you're a mechanic, you buy Snap-on tools, right? If you're a dead serious mechanic, you're buying Snap-on tools. Now, you're going to pay 3 times as much for the Snap-on tools as you would for some Husky or some Craftsman shit you buy at the local Home Depot, right? But everyone knows that a snap-on wrench is just better. The ratchets are tighter.
It's gonna last forever.
It lasts forever, and you make money. You're using it to make money, right? If you go on the snap-on truck and you buy $50,000 worth of tools from the guy and hand him the money right there and ask for a free T-shirt, he'll tell you they don't have any free T-shirts. Our snap-on guy in Southern California used to have a bucket of red vines on the counter in the back, and he'd be like, "Oh, since you spent some money, you can have a couple red vines." They won't give you anything. There's no discount. There's no freebies because that's what it is, right? In this industry, people are making way more money than mechanics are, and they go into the hydro store and they want to pay a nickel more than the hydro store paid for it, and the hydro store is willing to sell it to them for a nickel over what they paid. And it's like, you're using this $200 piece of equipment to make tens of thousands of dollars, right? So there was value, but it was a race to the bottom. A lot of stores are out of business because they gave away all their profit competing with each other. I see the same thing happening in the legal cannabis market. Everybody's basically $25 ounces. You see it on billboards. You're like, how in the fuck is that even possible? And I wouldn't want to smoke that. But it is what it is, right? So I find here that when I first got here 2 years ago during COVID, black market prices were still over $2,000 a pound. I couldn't believe it because in California it was down sub 1,500 or so. Out here, there's a lot of property. Everything's spread out. Guys got big pole barns with a lot of lights in them. I mean, I've seen 70-year-old farmers in overalls come in the hydro store with a trailer and pick up 8 pallets of dirt. I mean, everybody's a farmer out here, whether it's corn or cannabis, right? But now prices are way down, sub $1,000. Dispensaries going out of business, getting busted for taking illegal stuff in the back door. So I think it kind of what happens in California, Oregon, Colorado. I think it's been a cycle of what's happened, and I think it was not known if it would happen. It was a potential, but it's just kind of the way that the cookie crumbled over time, I guess I'd say. Now I've seen over the last year, a lot of people, even who grew out here for the last 10 or 15 years, have shut it down. They were like, it's not worth all the labor and everything to put out a quality product and then get beat up by brokers over trying to get it for next to nothing. It's not profitable. So they stopped. Well, then guess what happened? The prices started going back up again because now there's not as much black market material available. I think that also places like Oklahoma, California, and Oregon, they're using the postal service and the UPS and FedExes, and they're shipping tens of thousands of pounds a week all over the country to other states that aren't legal. And so that's driven the prices down. The West has flooded all the way to the East Coast. I see it more and more every single day. Nobody's really looking for any weed here because just like Amazon, you can have it dropped off at your front door by your cousin's nephew's best friend's sister-in-law's brother who grows it in Okefenokee, Oklahoma, and he'll send you pounds for $400 a piece. And, how are you going to compete with that? So I think regulation's been kind of a cancer on the society or on the situation, but I know it's for the better in the long run, hopefully. But, then the big pharma money, I mean, we could talk about this for weeks, but I see the industry here is probably pretty much the same as it is everywhere else. Everywhere else that has full recreational and medicinal, they've experienced the same growing pains as Michigan has too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really, like $4,000 a pound weed was a function of its being illegal and the risks that you had to take, to make that happen. And now that those, I guess, consequences are gone, cannabis has definitely become a lot more of a commodity. And I would equate it to beer, how it's probably going to end up. I think there's going to be a handful of, Miller, Coors, Michelob, grower ops, but hopefully the craft growers will still be around, making enough money to make it worthwhile. Cause I like consuming good cannabis. I don't like, mids.
Right.
So fingers crossed for the future, I guess.
Yeah, I think that they're going to try to shove a square peg into a round hole, right? And they're going to try to just force some marijuana lights or some marijuana 100s into every 7-Eleven and convenience store for $5 a pack or whatever it is. But it's it's not just like chips. It's not Lay's or Fritos or Doritos or it's and I think that the reason that you have a strong cannabis or a strong craft beer market is because it's not just people aren't just getting high. They enjoy the flavor or the smell or the different effect that they get from something. And I think that you'll always have a craft cannabis market because there's always people who want quality over quantity. I mean, there's always
Yeah.
going to be that guy who just needs a cheap cup of coffee to get his day started, but then there's those people who got to wear their UGG boots to go get their iced frappy whatever caramel macchiatos at Starbucks. And I think that you're going to end up with that still over time, but it's definitely we've got a long way to go. I don't think we're really going to see where it's going to eventually go until it's federally legal. Until it's
Yeah.
federally legal, it's just a toss up, and it's there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think that that also plays into the issues that we have.
Yep. Yeah. Honestly, looking back at things, I had a real hope that President Trump was going to have the balls to push for federal legalization. I think he would have won over a lot of liberals if he would have done that. And then we got Biden, who knows what he's doing, any day of the week. So
He
I would
doesn't
have
know what
thought
he's
federal
doing.
legalization.
Biden doesn't know what he's doing any minute of the day, and I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm more of like a moderate constitutionalist libertarian type. I'm like, if you want to smoke crack at home, smoke all the crack you want. Just don't come over here and steal my VCR, and we don't have a problem. You know what I mean? I don't care if you want to pretend that you're a boy or a girl or whatever the hell you want to do. Just don't push it down my throat. Just don't push it on my family's children. Don't make it something that's cool and trendy. You know what I mean? Because it is an issue, and these people, they have a lot of tough times being who they feel that they are or whatever. And so I try not to get into politics, but if you remember, Joe Biden was going to make it legal. They're going to make weed legal. Him and Kamala Harris are going to make it legal. And then what do? They pardoned a bunch of people who had misdemeanors for like carrying a joint in a federal park. You know what I mean? And like and he's talking about how they can't get jobs, they can't do this. That was bullshit. No felonies were expunged. All the people that he pardoned got a fancy letter in the mail if they even still lived at the address from when they got convicted 20 years ago. Because remember, they can't get an
Right.
apartment, they can't get a house, but they sent them a letter saying that you're forgiven for your sins, basically. So, and people heralded it. I saw even people in our industry being like, "Good job, creepy Uncle Joe." And it's like he didn't do shit. He didn't do shit. He pardoned what 1,600 people who had a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor doesn't keep you from getting a job. It doesn't keep you from getting an apartment, a bank account.
These days, a felony or misdemeanor for cannabis is almost like something you want to put on your resume to show you know what you're doing.
Right? Then you're a master grower and you can get a six-figure job at your new dispensary, right? That's funded by some guys who've never even smoked weed before, but they got a bunch of money and their dad's an attorney and their name's Chad.
Oh, we could talk all day about Chad and his rich
Absolutely.
uncle.
But yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of
Go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just.
I was just going to say, it's kind of crazy how, like, I'd say most people are pretty libertarian, middle of the road, like me and like you, and yet the country is divided. Just doesn't make sense.
It's all by design, and I think that that it's they obviously they want to keep you divided. They even talk about race relations and things like that. I felt like I graduated high school in 1991 in a place that was like an epicenter of slavery, and our school was probably half black and half white, and we all got along better than because like hip hop music had brought that culture to each other and everybody, I have black friends that go to ACDC concerts and so it was different. Now I feel like the racial tension's even worse. And it's obviously created by the media and the government. And there's no moderation anymore. You're either a full on conservative, Bible thumping, like anti abortion conservative, or you're a LGBTQTLMNOP socialist, communist, like crazy person who wants free money from the government. There's no one in the middle anymore. And it'd be nice to see us get back to that. But I don't know, man. I'm just glad to be out here in the country where everybody has a lot of guns.
Well, yeah, we could get off on that tangent too, but that'll be for another episode. Horti, where can people follow you on social media and then get in touch with you for business purposes?
Yeah, my Facebook, I have Horti Control, HORTI Control. I also have Horti Kris, HORTI, which is probably the best place to get a hold of me. KRIS, not CHRIS. So Horti Kris with a K and no H. On Instagram, I have DustShroom is the site for the actual business, DustShroom, and then Horti Kris again on Instagram. Those are pretty much the two I do. I'm a little too old for TikTok, and I talk too much to only be able to use 150 characters on Twitter. So I just stick with the old Instagram mostly, and I check Facebook every day to see whose birthday it is, but I don't really participate in all the social experimentation they're doing out there. So
no, I'm not on Facebook at all anymore. And yeah, I do love their emails though when they tell me I have friends having birthdays so that I can send them a message.
Every day I log on, I go to so-and-so, and because I have thousands of friends on there from the Heavy Tea Show, right? So-and-so and 13 other people have birthdays today, and I go there and I go, happy birthday, send, happy birthday, send, happy birthday, send. And then I just go back to Instagram and look at pictures of cars with big turbos on them and stuff. And but that's also, you can look us up at horticontrol.com, dustshroom.com, and then the new company, which I haven't gotten up and running yet, but it also has a website, hortifilter.com. If you want to inquire about getting the products or purchase, I don't sell direct. We sell through distributors. For your grow gens and whatnot, we use HRG, Horticultural Rep Group. And then for everyone else, we use DL Wholesale. Both of those companies carry our products, and you can set up accounts with them and get our products in. If you have any questions about it, hit me up on Instagram. It's probably the best way. Send me a DM in Instagram. I don't have Messenger on Facebook. I'm not installing more apps to be able to look at messages. So hit me up on Instagram at either DustShroom or Horti, KRIS, and I can point you in the right direction, help you figure out anything. People consult with me a lot, even on just grows, because I have a lot of experience. I do a lot of consulting on the side for a little extra bread, and any questions you have, I usually probably have the answer, or I know who can get it to you.
Well, Kris, it was really good getting to talk with you again and, hear about your background and stuff. And hope to see you in person sometime down the road.
Absolutely. Hey, Eric, I appreciate your time. Good luck with the podcast. I like that you're doing it. People need to keep this kind of stuff going on, like you said. And I'm glad we were able to get 20 or 30 minutes out of this interview.
Shoot, that was it. I'm on 50 minutes by my count.
That was a joke.
Awesome. I had a paper in front of the clock. I didn't even know how long we were going.
You were like, I got a bunch of questions. I'm like, don't worry. I've done this thousands of times. I can I can talk a lot, and I can talk in an interview on a podcast. It's what I used to do, right?
Yeah, you're a talker.
Thanks, man.
Well, Kris, on that note, good talking with you, and we'll see you soon.
All right, take care, man.